Welcome to Conversations with Zi and Vindesh, a weekly discussion that explores common life challenges and offers practical solutions. Learn more at dharmamedia.com. That's DHARMA media.com.
Yeah, good to go. All right, man. Good to see you, Zi.
Good to see you. Fired up, brother. Fired up.
Yeah, we're having a pretty interesting conversation. We got to work on the title. I wanted to use "Don't Be Anyone's Bitch." Caitlin didn't like that, so maybe we work with something else. But the point of today's discussion is really don't live in a way where you want other people to like you. And it's very personal for me because that's how I grew up. I grew up as this model minority. And a big part of being a model minority is make sure you don't offend other people. Make sure you keep your head down. You don't act too aggressive. You keep offensive opinions to yourself. You kind of act jokey and solicitous so that other people feel comfortable around you. And it's kind of a disgusting way of being, but that's just how it is. I mean, I never knew anything differently until later in my life when I was just feeling the results of this, and it affected my health. And I had this pressure in my chest, and I felt like I was going to explode. And that's really when I got into my condition. And I tried to understand, with your help, Zi, why I felt the way that I did. And a lot of it was that I was just choking down my humanity. I was taking a authentic version of myself and putting it in a cage, putting it in this little box, trying to contort it into something that it wasn't. And it put me in a state of rage and dysregulation. So that's a bit of an aside. That's a bit about my story. Fortunately, I'm more aware of all that. But one thing that's happened, Zi, since I've become aware of this, is you start to see these patterns over and over. And you realize how pervasive this is. And it is a standard colonial strategy. It is a standard white supremacy strategy where you get people of color to try and fit in, to try and gain approval from the ruling class. So even if they hate you and they despise you, you still want to be like them. You want to be close to them. You want to be close to power. In some ways, it's very practical because even if you don't agree with the ideology, if you are close to that power, you're generally treated better. So maybe you get a better cell in prison. Maybe you get some scraps of food. But it gets deeper than that because it's actually wired into our programming. And in fact, there was a movie, what was it called? You got me out of this movie, Zi. I think it was White Tiger.
Yeah.
Is that the name of it? Yeah. So you see the same dynamic with the caste system. And in this movie, White Tiger, you've got this guy who's lower caste and he's serving this upper caste family. And he's basically going along with whatever they want. So there's a car accident and someone is killed in the car accident and the family asks this servant to take the fall. And they say, here, just sign this paper. Just sign this affidavit saying that you were the one who was driving. And he's looking kind of confused. And he's like, oh, why would you want me to sign it? Because I wasn't driving. But he's still smiling. And he's still going along with it. And finally, he signs it. And then you see this other scene, which I thought was brilliant because it touched me. I mean, I felt this viscerally when I saw this scene. You see him in a room and he's just screaming. And he's so angry with himself. Like, why would I do it? You know, I hate myself. I hate these people. Why would I go along with this? But the programming ran so deep that he couldn't even overcome that impulse. And that's what happens to a lot of us minorities and a lot of people of color. We're just programmed to fit in. We're programmed to not rock the boat. And we're told if you follow all the rules, if you check off all those boxes, you'll be fine. You'll have an easy life. And I think that's true to an extent. I mean, at least for a certain set of people, you can play the game and you can benefit materially, but you're never going to be accepted completely. And you're always going to be viewed differently. Now, the reason we started talking about this, Zi, if you look at what's happened with the university protests, of course, we've had these protests around Palestine and Israel, and the fact that we're seeing a huge amount of carnage in Palestine. And students are around the country are saying, we've had enough of this. I mean, this is insane. We don't want to support this. And you're seeing a huge pushback from the ruling class, from billionaires, from the donors of these universities, from the politicians. There are congressional hearings about this, about how these protests are anti-Semitic and they're making students feel unsafe, and we have to shut these down. Now, if you look at Columbia, which was the most recent example of this, Columbia University is run by an Egyptian woman. She's the president, and she saw what happened with the congressional hearings a few months ago. If you go back to that point, you had the president of Harvard, who was a black woman, who was kicked out of her seat. So she was at the congressional hearings, and it was basically a setup. So they said something like, do you support speech that talks about the mass killing of Jewish students? And there was really no right answer. I mean, of course, on the surface, you would say, no, I don't. But then if you say, I don't, and the next question is going to be, okay, why were you supporting the protests? And the protests were calling for the extermination of Jewish people. And then you say, no, they weren't. And then you'd be screamed at and you'd be called out. So it was a no-win situation. But there was so much pressure around that she had to resign. So this Columbia woman saw what happened to the Harvard president, Claudine Gay, and she said, you know what? I'm going to do the exact opposite. I'm going to do exactly what these people want. There's this Congresswoman, Elise Stefanik, who's running the hearings. I'm going to give her every answer that she wants. I'm going to tell her that the protests are completely unacceptable, that they violate our code of conduct. And not only that, I'm going to call in the police. I'm going to bring the NYPD into the university to clear out this protest, which I don't think has been done in 50 years. I mean, it's this unprecedented step. And it led to a huge backlash, both with the students as well as other members of the community. But the interesting thing to me, Z, is even after she went through all this, she bent over backwards to gain the approval of Elise Stefanik and the approval of the donors and the approval of everyone who is saying, let's shut down these protests because we don't want people protesting about the murder or the genocide of poor brown Palestinians. Even after doing all of that, she was still called out. And she was still told, you should resign. So that same congresswoman said, you know what, you did not go far enough. You should resign. You are a disgrace. And to me, that was so interesting to watch because it reinforced this whole colonial playbook that I've experienced, that I saw in that movie that I was telling you about, that I've seen. If you take a look at history, you see how this plays out over time in different countries, different periods, where you do everything you can to ingratiate yourself, and it's never going to be enough. You're never going to be accepted. You're always going to be the fall person. You'll always be treated as a second-class citizen. So I found this fascinating because it's almost a real-time window into colonialism, and it's happening here in the United States. And it brings us back to the topic of this conversation, which is stay in your lane. You know, you are who you are. I think the way to get through this life is just to be authentic, be true to you. It's good for you. It's going to make you healthier. It's going to make you more productive. Not everyone is going to like you, but that's an impossible standard. It's going to make you a more interesting human being, a more valuable member just of this world, because a lot of this world is about people coming together and sharing different perspectives and bringing something unique to the table. But unfortunately, Z, this idea of authenticity, of integrity, of standing by what we believe, in some ways has been beaten out of us, especially those of us who identify as minorities, who have fallen into I don't even know what to call this system, you know, this post-colonial system or this racial hierarchy or class hierarchy that exists in society. So that's a pretty long intro. I know I've covered a lot of ground, but it's a fascinating topic for me. And you've really brought a lot of this to my attention. So I want to hear from you. I mean, give us your take. When you look at what's happened with Colombia, what's happening right now in society, just give us your thoughts.
Yeah, Roddy, it's like this, man. If you look over a short window of time, all these things have been done before. I always say that the story of humanity is a nice story, but it's not that interesting because it's been told so many times. Not that it's not a great story, but it's been told so many times that most of this stuff is predictable. And I was reading something and just cruising through the media, and it was saying, oh, what are college students doing protesting? And they had all these people commenting, in my day, I was so busy doing finals and keeping my grades up, I didn't have time for protests. And I heard this whole thing. It's like 3 or 4 days, they were saying how this is so bizarre that college students are protesting. It is so weird. It's so strange. The colleges have really gone down the tubes because kids are protesting. And I'm saying in my lifetime, every 10 years, there will be a topic that motivates these typically passive, playful, hedonistic kids into standing up for something, whether you agree with them or not. In my day, it was civil rights and the Vietnam War. It was all student protests. It was all student protests older people, when you get over 40, 45 years old, you have a house note, you have that, you tend to be more conservative. You tend to want things to be the way they've always been because you've had enough years, you've had 45 years to ride the system and you're used to it. Young people want to change the world, whether you agree with them or not. That's not my point, but that is the nature of young people. They're not recruiting 45 to 50, 60-year-old people for military service and this and that because they're already stuck in their ways. You get young people who are malleable, who are shapeable, who have not quite finished forming their prefrontal cortex, but they also are visionaries. All these protests, whether you agree or not, are young people responding to the world they know. Not the world you know, but the world they know. There was an incident at a college years ago, people can look it up, called Kent State. Columbia will turn out the same way. So they told this model minority woman, in order for you to be in good with everybody else, you're going to have to sick the police on these kids. It doesn't take a lot of ruminations or thought to figure out what's going to happen when the first cop kills a kid. That kid will live forever in history. Everybody down the chain of command will be held responsible, and the riots will get bigger. They'll develop more fame, more notoriety. There will be a reckoning in that way. They want to ban TikTok because of this direct information line. As one of the congressmen slipped and said, we don't want people just getting the truth, right? One of them slipped up and said that. And it wasn't a Democrat or a Republican. It's not divided by that. These people think a certain way. They're only masking that, telling you they're on one side or the other. At the end of the day, we're all screwed. So let's get that out of the way. So young people always are the ones that ask for social change. They're the ones researching. The old folks, man, we're just trying to get through and figure out how to be retired and be left alone. We fought many a battles. We've watched things happen. We've seen the rise and fall of different eras and ideologies. And then we find a flow. We just want to stay in that flow. We don't want to rock the boat. Young people, that's the nature of young people. So when you see these lies, just go get a history book. They might even purge it from the internet. So you're going to have to get a book. The 60s, the 50s, the 70s were filled with protests. People died in those protests. The Vietnam War was a big deal. There were people who spent years in prison for the civil rights movement. There are still people in prisons. People fought and died for civil rights that are being simply wiped away. All they did is change and say, okay, it's DEI, so we're going to get rid of it because it's such a horrible thing. But remember that for years, for over a good portion of the last century, people fought for small ways in to this idea, this kind of like idea of America, right? This idea of equal opportunity. And the people that are against it, they don't have to sweat. They don't have to lose sleep. They don't have to offer a drop of blood, just a swipe of a pen, and it's gone. There's even a Korean American guy who's suing the government because he said it gives Black people more opportunities than him. Trust me, Black people, there's no opportunity and there's no advantage to being Black in America. Let's be completely candid. There are no upsides to being Black in America, no matter what you do. Look at the Uncle Ruckus guy that's the head of the Pentagon. He's saying everything they want him to say. He won't even comment on the suffering and genocide, which is, by the way, tends to be very dear to people who have been colonized and are of a certain hue and so forth. We've seen it all, so it looks familiar. We just call it the way we see it. I don't have a dog in the fight in terms of religion or any of that. I just weigh things as they're weighed. And I look at causality. What caused the thing? You ask yourself what caused the thing. Anywhere that you have historically, when you have people from Europe going to different countries and taking over the countries, the people resist, right? The people resist. That's just kind of a normal thing. Wherever you are.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there are only a few ways out of that. Like either you wipe out the people. That was a model over here. You get rid of the Native Americans. Or there's some assimilation over a long period of time. And you get to some equilibrium. Or there's resistance and you overturn the ruling class.
Well,
and then you go back and you take possession, you govern
How
yourselves.
come we can't talk like that? Like Churchill used to talk. He considered Indian a lesser race. These people not worthy of your compassion or consideration. That's what Winston Churchill said. Let's look at Elon Musk's view on the mining in Africa. When asked why doesn't he pay the people a decent living wage, he said, why should I? They're nothing. That's what he said. They're nothing. He said he wouldn't get on a plane with a black pilot because of a DEI, what they call affirmative action now. I don't care if the guy is the best pilot in the world. The fact that he's black, I wouldn't get on a plane with him. I like his honesty, but it also gives me a choice to whether buy his products or not. And we know where this is headed. But it's just an interesting thing. If we stay in our own clarity, we can hear things without overreacting. We know what's going on. Everybody can see that. It's just how it's like we feel like there's an unseen person that is editing our words and speech. If we did nothing but be more honest with each other, we could improve the condition of humanity overall. You don't have to like everybody. You may have been trained to hate other people. You may buy into the colonial idea of society, the hierarchy of race. You may buy into that. Can you just say it? And people say, oh, if I say it, I'll lose my job. No, you won't. You won't lose anything. Elon Musk hasn't lost a penny. These people haven't lost a cent. The problem is when you dance back and forth, and what a lot of these people who are betrayers, so to say, of the suffering of, or the way they got to where they are. There's this girl that comes on, I think her name is Candace Owens or something. She comes on and says she made her fame by saying really horrible things about Black people. And she also won lawsuits for her being discriminated against because she was Black when she was in high school or something. And then when she got fired by Ben Shapiro for having a conflicting view of the Middle East issues, she just became another nigger. And then she found out she didn't have maybe enough coverage, so now she's hanging around Black journalists or whatever you call this new internet medium and trying to get in grace. It's like you got to stay in your lane. Keep being that model of self-hate that people really love. They really love to parade those types of people around. They really love their dancing monkeys. They really love them. As you see the Pentagon guy, same thing. He just sits there, does what he told. The minute he had to go get a prostate exam, they said, why didn't you tell us? Why should he bear such an intimate and personal thing to the public? That's not his job. But he's held under a different metric and weight than everybody else. And he buck dances back and forth. And then you'll always see these people they put out in front of the media. They have an Indian guy and they have this Black lady that they put as press secretaries, and they just get eviscerated. And it's you feel sad for them, but somebody told them that is the way to true success, whatever success means to them. And for the rest of us, if we just stay in our lane, I don't want to just stay on that topic, but we could look at many other areas of life. I look at it, I told you about couples bickering and fighting. And you try to get in there and be a counselor or a support of some kind, and you find yourself gouging your own eyes out because these people have developed a way of communicating and interacting with each other that is so dysfunctional. But for them, it's worked for many, many years. There are many unhappy couples that have been together for 30 and 40 years. I remember I had a client years ago who had a bunch of intestinal issues. And as we were working on it and we were talking about managing stress and doing that, and then people get to know you and they open up to you. And she said that her husband and her, she doesn't get to sleep because they fight every night between 10 and 3 in the morning. They argue. I said, between 10 and 3 in the morning. She said, we've been arguing for years. Arguing for years over what? Well, he had an affair with a woman in 73. And around 1978, he told me about it. And it just, the betrayal bothers me. And sometimes when it's quiet, we sit home at night, I start thinking about it. I watch him, I see this guy betrayed me. And they argue and they say they don't fall asleep till 2, 3 in the morning. I'm like, what kind of hell were you assigned to? So luckily enough, I guess the guy finally passed away a few years back. So they had gotten married in the early 70s. And until the mid 2000s, in the first quarter of the 21st century, they were up from 10 to between 3 and 2 in the morning arguing over an affair he had had that, by the way, she didn't know about until he confessed it. And I'm like, how do you do that? So no therapist could help them. She told me, and so she was having health problems for not sleeping, really, and this kind of anxiety. I'm like wondering, I realized then there was nothing that anybody could do, let alone me. So I just stayed in my lane. I just avoided her at all costs. And any somewhat reasonable person would say, how is this possible? How is this possible? Then you realize that not a lot of people are really reasonable and rational. And so when we try to stay in our own lane, you want to look at situations like you're driving down a road and there are hazards coming up. You're looking down the road. You want to not ride into the hazard to observe it. You want to find your way around and out of that hazard so you can keep going your own way. This applies to families. This applies to countries, cities, communities. As an opt-out, you want to really stay in your own lane. And we have all these examples that we could talk about forever, right? We could talk about things forever. And there are situations out there that are so obvious, so clear and obvious, but you see the mental, spiritual, and emotional contortionist acts these people do to kind of make sense of that is nonsensical. For people trying.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Z. That's on my mind too, because I look at what's happening today in the world, and it's the same playbook. The same playbook is taken out to justify war. It's like war 101. So you smear all the opposition, you silence the opposition. You go back to World War I. Anyone who was against World War I and was against the United States entering the war was sympathetic to the Kaiser. So they were too pro-German. And so they had to be arrested and silenced. You look at Vietnam, it was the same thing. You're a communist sympathizer. So you must be allied with the North Vietnamese or with China. You go to 2003 and same playbook. You've got people who were speaking out about no evidence of weapons of mass destruction, but you can't even say that because suddenly you're unpatriotic. And then, by the way, the other part of the playbook that you're talking about, you trot out the happy minority, or maybe not so happy, but the minority. You get Colin Powell, who's there, who's making the case, which I think is one of the things that really sold people on the war. And so he sells out and allows this invasion of Iraq. And then today it's the exact same thing. It's, oh, these students are brainwashed. They're Hamas sympathizers. They've been taken over by Hamas. They're listening to TikTok too much. They've got all the pro-Hamas talking points. Iran must be so happy because they're converting people in the United States to terrorists. It's like, what the hell are you talking about? I mean, you just got a set of people who don't want to see other people bombed to death for no reason. It's very simple. I mean, to me, it's very clear.
And take accountability. And so the young people aren't going for the okie doke. And the sad part is that it's like the COVID thing, Ben. It's like the COVID thing. You can't talk to people. You can't have a conversation. You can't have a ones and zeros conversation, a yes or no. It's just like I was talking to a warring couple, and I wanted to reduce it down to the simplest thing, a yes or a no. And when you can't do that, you're introducing into it intangible variables that will just muck up everything. So too with the nature of these protests, the natures of views. We've done it before. So everybody that was not pro-war Vietnam, let's use that example. The videos came out of the massacres in Vietnam. There was something called the My Lai massacre, where this guy, William Calley, was raping, killing, and shooting little kids in the head, his platoon, and he got busted, and nothing really happened to him. He became a used car salesman somewhere, and his life went on. But they captured it on camera. This is before TikTok, before any of that. And then people start really looking into the war, and they found out that the Gulf of Tonkin reason for getting in the war was made up by the government. It was completely made up. There was no domino thing. There was no communist threat. There was none of that. And then years later, 50-something years later, they release the documents and the secret recordings of the Vietnam War. It was in Nixon's best interest to prolong the war for the presidency. And people just go, oh, everybody who was for that, they just go, oh, well. And all the hapless soldiers who went in under this idea that someone was attacking their homeland, those were young people. You say young people are gullible. That's how you get them to go to war under the idea of a national threat. It's young people coming out of high school, joining the Marines, right? Joining the Army, joining all this, putting themselves in harm's way. That's who's the age of the people in the graves at any Veterans Memorial Place is just around 25 years old. All those dead people. Rarely do you see someone over 25. Okay? Let's just get that straight. Those people were gullible. So if you talk about the protesters being gullible, everybody who's in the military of a certain age is gullible because there are no national threats unless you bring it on. You attack people, you oppress people, you colonize people, they will fight you back. There's not a big discussion whether you like it or not. If you tread on someone and they have the energy to resist you, that's what they will do. Try to suffocate whoever you're next to. I'm gonna go try and suffocate Caitlin right now. Let me see. Okay, boom, she just hits me in the head. So she is now a terrorist, and I need the support of a superpower to finish choking Caitlin. Is that right, Caitlin? Because Caitlin's going to fight for her life if I oppress, colonize her, or try to rob her of her humanity. It's not complicated, people. What's complicated is the dressing we put over it. We have biases. We like this and we don't like that. Those are things we were taught, that were instilled in us. But there is something very, very basically human. If you set upon someone, they will fight you. A deer will fight a lion. A deer will fight a lion. It does not want to be a passive or easy meal. Yeah, it may lose, but every now and then, the hunted gets the gun. Every now and then. And so when you see it, don't be shocked. Oh my God, the poor lion got stomped by a deer. That's horrible. That's what we sound like. So for all of us who are opting out, stay in your lane. Stay to your truths. Keep looking for that, but also understand that the way you arose, the way you came to your truth was through your own dogma and indoctrination. So just check it so you could find that higher path. It really gives you a better perspective of many areas of your life. I was telling a young woman I've been working with on some health issues why it's important for her to be physically fit, right? So in addition to doing your mental work, your internal medical work, get your health right, In order to stay that way, you have to be physically sound. Why is that? Because your body is an example and a representative of your overall well-being physically and mentally. If you do not have an enduring body, your character seems to fail at that point, because the endurance you need to deal with life stresses is not unlike the endurance you require to run, to lift, to box, to train, to swim. So the more that you can do what's hard, what's challenging, the more you can complete what you started through the duress, the loss of endurance, through the challenges, the more hardy you become emotionally. You can fight through things. If you don't have a physical practice, and let's say you're one of these kids and you're just sitting around with the electric cigarette and you're TikToking or whatever you're doing, interneting, and everything in life becomes hard. Getting up to go to the grocery store becomes hard. Not getting your latte at the right temperature becomes devastating. So, in order to create a catalyst of your efforts, that must require some sort of physical discipline, right? A proof of life. That's why one of the biggest things that you find in medicine is going to a doctor that they themselves is unhealthy. I don't know if you guys had that experience. You ever gone to a doctor and the doctor's unhealthy? So the can you say yeah? So the treatment begins when you meet the clinician. Hey, I'm Dr. Bob. And now Dr. Bob has a boil or cyst, cold sore on his face. Maybe he's weighing 300, 350. He's wheezing. He's got a rash. What does that do to the placebo and nocebo effect in you? What advice can he offer you? They just like this thing with what is this thing with the body positive fitness trainers? It's just the most ridiculous thing you see. It's a bunch of people just laying around in tight spandex. They're not fit into fitness, right? And so when you start to work your body, that simulates oftentimes the stressors of daily life. Get up and do it. It's like getting up in the morning and doing your grind. Sun's up, you're out of there. You got to get up and push yourself. You're sick, you got to push yourself. Excuse me. You're mentally down a little bit, get off your ass and work through it. You feel depressed, get happy. You see what I'm saying? And so you want to build yourself up to be able to do that as you're navigating this world. And when I say it goes back to being able to navigate and stay in your lane, because so many things will pop up. It'll be family stuff where there are people in your family that you can't even help, but because they're your family, you'll get out of your lane and get in their lane, and it doesn't do anything for you, and it feeds their dysfunction. You have to steer away from them. With this political thing, we know what's going on. Even the people that agree with it, with the genocide and all that kind of stuff, they get it. That's our side. We want our side to prevail. Well, it looks like, the other thing that happened back in, pretty much looks like the World War II stuff going on here, where genocide's the same stuff and some of the same players. A lot of Germans, a lot of Eastern Europeans involved in mass killing. Seems like that again. I would be proud of that. Just be proud of it. Stay in your lane and say, I don't care what you call me. If you call me a Nazi, call me this, I'm game for it. And you know what would happen is that we would have clearer boundaries with people. I was at the pool this weekend, and there was a guy who had came in from the Middle East, soldier, bruised knuckles. He had little teeth marks all in his knuckles. And he was really unhealthy overall. How he was even in the military is shocking. And he was saying, yeah, you know what's going on over in my country? I just came over here for a vacation. He felt great about himself. He felt wonderful. He didn't lose any sleep, right? And I think there's something to admire about that, but I can admire any person who stands by what they believe. I can admire the Ku Klux Klan. I used to meet neo-Nazis and Nazis and things like that in the Air Force, and they owned it. They owned it. They were proud of it. What I'm not cool with is when you aren't willing to fall on your sword. We all know how this is going to turn out. This thing will escalate. There will be more guerrilla warfare, because if you have one group that's highly armed and supported by a superpower and that other people aren't, let's go Vietnam. Let's just pretend it's Vietnam all over again. It's Vietnam all over again. So just let's trade Middle East for Vietnam, right? So you go to colonize Vietnam, they fight back. There's a lot of stuff being said. Eventually, the Vietnamese are free, right? And at the cost of many lives. They were losing the war bad at first. And now people say, well, the technology is better. We have more drones. We have more facial recognition. They've said that in every war. The big war in America, like in the cowboy times in the earlier, there was the Gatling gun that you could mow down a lot of people with the Gatling gun. Then before there, it was dynamite. You can blow up huge amounts of people. You could break them, beat them into submission, or annihilate them for generations. And there are times when that strategy has won. You think about, I think, New Zealand, as opposed to Australia. New Zealand killed off all their Maori. There's very few of them. They killed them all off. And I guess that worked out for New Zealand. Australia has a little trouble with the Abos down there. They call them Abos. And I remember talking to an Australian woman. She was describing Abos to me, right? And she says, oh, they're not like you and me. All they want to do is drink antifreeze and stay high. That's what she told me. Real cute European Australian girl. I said, really, that's all they're into. But they're not like you and me. And I told her, I'm an Abo. She says, no, you're not. You're like so civilized. Said that, and it was real cool. Plus, she was real cute. So I let her get away with a lot of that stuff. But it was something about the honesty of her indifference. Then you know how to deal with that person. She can do her life, I can do my life. I don't think that's a problem. I think it becomes a problem when we try to universalize our worldview. When you get out of your lane, you're going into other people's territory you know nothing about. And you're lost. It's like going to a city you've never been in and you don't have a guide. You're going to be lost. You may put yourself in harm's way. And what we want to do as we opt out and learn this is we want to appreciate people's views so we can have a clear view of the world and those we interact with. It is completely okay, like Americans said after 9/11, kill everybody. Kill everybody. We don't care if they had anything to do with it at all. If they knew the person, if they're fond of the person, if they didn't immediately say they were against the person, if they didn't immediately condemn someone in the Middle East for bombing the World Trade Center, kill them. Giuliani, as corrupt as he is, became America's mayor. That was the best thing that happened to Giuliani. It shut down any investigations of whatever happened at the World Trade. Anybody who questioned it became a conspiracy theorist or anti-American. Trillions of dollars later, tens of thousands of lives, millions of lives later, it was a mistake. You still have the same enemies, more. You're not any better off. People are still killing their neighbor. Then the next thing comes up. You remember in Somalia, they had the movie Black Hawk Down about the heroic fighters that went to Somalia, and the nickname for Somalian people were skinnies. Skinnies. Little bitty people, not physically imposing by Western standards, but they wanted to be left alone and they kicked ass and took names. And then people said, well, if we had more weapons, if we could have just nuked them, how about if you could have just left them alone? Would that have been an option if you left them alone, if you would have stayed in your lane? As a veteran, I can say, when people say, thank you for your service, thank you for your service. I've said this before. It's just a weird thing because I signed up because I was protesting in college and was penalized by the dean of the college for being involved in protests. So for all the people who say students don't protest, students have always protested. There's students that didn't, and there's students that did. But that's the nature of young folks. Even not protesting is a form of protest. Not being a part of it is a way the adolescent mind works. But they'll say, thank you for your service. And I said, you know what? I got paid to do that. I didn't do that because I believed in some idea of whatever the idea of democracy being spread around the world. I never benefited from that. He said, oh, yes, you did. No, that's your story. And it's okay. Stay in your lane and keep your story. I'll keep mine. That's my reality and you have yours. What is wrong with us that we can't do that? In the case that we have here in our community, we have people of many, many different backgrounds and political views that come to a common intersection of shared behavior, thinking, and action based on being healthy and well. But they still leave here their own selves. They're not being asked to change or to go with my ideas about things. If something they're doing is offset or weird to me, I don't try to proselytize or recruit them. I just relate to them to where we can meet at. How long can we ride this bus together? And at some point, you got to get off at your train stop or your bus stop and live your life. That's totally okay. Because what we universally want to do is live our lives out as long as we can and die happy. Anything that interferes from that is really the enemy. The enemy isn't far away. There's the enemy exists in your heart. You have to make people want to hate you. And when people say they're being indoctrinated, kids, have you ever tried to convince your kids to do any damn thing? You got kids, right? You can't convince them to do anything unless you're threatening them or depriving them of something.
Yeah, and the other interesting thing about kids, they call it like they see it. They don't have all the filters. They don't know what's socially acceptable, what they're allowed to say or not. They just say it. And that's why it's so refreshing to be around kids. It gets back to your point about just be you. It's freeing. It's like, okay, great. You today, actually, it was hilarious. One of my kids was complaining because her grandparents are going to take her to school. And she was saying, oh, my God, it's so embarrassing. I don't want them to be around. They're so old. I mean, but it was just funny as shit.
Yeah, but that's part of their brain development. They haven't developed that filter. So when you see college students who are inquisitive, they're actually studying the world. There's not a master indoctrinator. There is peer pressure. Young people do have a lot of peer pressure to be a part of a group. That's how they get into gang stuff, crazy stuff, frat parties, all that kind of weird stuff that later on they may not be too proud of themselves are. That's part of it. When you ask them, why did you do it? They say, well, my friends were doing it. I kind of wanted to be a part of something. And that's where parental interaction comes in a lot. And you typically will find that if you have really conservative parents, their children will go through a liberal phase. If you have really liberal parents, the kids will often go through a conservative phase. You see, it's the natural thing of finding your own way. So when they tell this lie that this is a unique and new thing that kids are protesting, I suggest people just break open some history books. It'll be wiped out. AI will wipe it out of the computer in a short period of time and retell history. But as we can still find it, and there are still people alive who went through it, you can talk to them, right? And we know how this is going to turn out, but you're still going to have to live your life. The day after the nukes start dropping and we get the first dirty bomb, you won't get a break on rent. There will be no COVID relief. There will be not a government program to help you recoup your losses. You're ass out and on your own. So hopefully your own means your community of people that you may trust or like. And again, those people may not hold your same political views religious views or ideological views, but you'll have something that bonds you that's a common theme. As we have here, people want to be healthy and well, and this is a good depot for that. But they don't come here so they can be indoctrinated or believe one way. There are things we just don't talk about. There's nothing wrong with that. Hell, there are things you just don't talk about with your intimate partner for the sake of harmony, as we talked about before. You want to be harmony versus virtue, right? You want to be all virtuous like these kids in the protest, and they're threatening them with their future. Well, in the future, we won't hire you. You won't get a job. So they have to decide right now, will I go with what I believe in my heart to be right? Or will I maintain a harmonious thing and kind of stay out of it so I can get a job later? Oftentimes, young people don't have a sense of next year or 10 years from now. So they typically will fall on their sword, but they'll do it for either side. Look at terrorists or the bomber. You look at Timothy McVeigh, who did the greatest terrorist act in the US prior to 9/11. Very committed. You listen to the guy, it makes total sense. He's a young man who drank the Kool-Aid. He's very committed to his idea, and he was willing to die for it, which he did. I think that's very honorable. I don't agree with what he did. I'm just saying I think it's honorable that you stand by your beliefs. Nowadays, people adjust their beliefs based on their fear of, right, their social imprint based on the media. I don't want anybody to see this on the internet in 10 years from now. You've seen many people fall because they'll open up a page or something they said when they were a teenager. Now they're 30 years old because that's how old the internet is now. And they say, well, I didn't mean to say exterminate all the blacks or whatever. You meant to say it. You were young, but now you know the consequence of saying that, whatever that may be, large or small. You say things. There's a lot of people, when they comment, they hide behind the keyboard because they're speaking from a place where they would never do publicly because they are not taking ownership of their own so-called viewpoint or ideology. It would be wonderful if people would comment and you could see the person, engage the person, like the First Amendment. You have a right to say anything, but there can also be a consequence to what you say. If somebody runs up to you and says, I'm going to kill you, you take that as a real threat and you fight them back. You're not in the wrong. They have the right to say that, but there may be a consequence to what they say. Now, use that, again, all this I'm saying is so we can think. We can think. Whatever your views are on the Middle East, it's your view. And we can look at history and see what that is. Here are the basic ingredients. Anyone who goes to another person's home against their will, they will probably fight you back. Repeat, repeat, repeat. Here, whatever you've embellished it with, whatever claims or deeds you showed up with, whatever that, you just imposed upon somebody, you ain't from here. Wherever you came from, they didn't like you for whatever you did there. And that's it. Same way in our lives. Couples interacting. You know what landmines you have to walk around in order to make things work out in your home. You breach there, there's going to be an explosion. That's why there are secrets. That's why secrets aren't always bad. A lot of times it is for the greater peace. It's diplomacy. Sometimes.
Yeah, that's also an interesting point. I mean, I've realized that as I've gotten older, that in relationships, it's fine. There are certain things that I don't want to share and vice versa. And in fact, a couple of years ago, I think I had this conversation with you. I found out that my wife had hid something from me. And initially it upset me and I felt betrayed. And then I thought about it and I thought, you know what, it's actually a pretty good strategy. It makes sense. It's what you're saying. It keeps the harmony. I mean, to your point, you've got to be prepared for the consequences. You have to know what the downside is. You have to know what the risk is if the other person finds out. But it's not the worst thing to have those boundaries. And it's an interesting point, getting back to the beginning of our conversation, where we're talking about staying in your lane and what that means. It means that we have to have clarity on who we are and how we think and what our worldview is. But we also need to be judicious about how to apply that and who to share that with. And so it really is almost, I can get a visual as we're talking of staying in your lane and what that means. You know how you think, you know what your destination is, you know what your goal is, but you don't have to drive all over the place to get there. You don't have to beat other people down with your point of view or your way of thinking. You can, if someone solicits your opinion, you can provide that opinion. You can contribute if it makes sense, but you're also aware of the collective. You're aware that you need some harmony. I mean, you don't want to be driving all over the freeway and causing accidents or train wrecks. So I think it's maybe a little bit of a tension sometimes because these things seem contradictory. But really, if you use that analogy of just driving down a freeway and staying in your lane, maybe that clears up a lot of the confusion. You know, we're clear on where we're going, but we're also going to do so in a way that doesn't impose on other people.
And it gives you an opportunity, again, to be that dispassionate observer, to observe the workings of things, observe causality. How did a person come to their view? Was it something they were told, or was it something they experienced, and through their experience, they interpreted? It makes me think, Raya, of funny conversations I've had when I travel and I'm hanging out, let's say in India, and one of my girlfriends asked me, "How do you meet so many girls in India? How come you have so many girlfriends?" And I was saying, "Well, I wasn't raised with the idea of an arranged marriage." And she said, "What do you mean?" I said, in order for you to take a person and them comfortable knowing that someone will pick them a mate, someone will pick you a mate at some point in your life. You'll come of age, and the reward of that is somebody will pick a mate. You don't have to go dating. You don't have to go to the gym to get in shape. You don't have to groom yourself a certain way. But at some moment, if you play your cards right, they will parade a bunch of potential spouses in front of you, and you get to choose. So all that effort of being in the gym, of working out, of being academically creative and having character, all the things that attract a mate, you don't need to do it. So you don't have those features. Nothing about you is that attractive because you don't have to be a part of that. But now you get somebody who's a part of that, who's had to work for everything, who's had to try to be the best at everything, who has to study and remake themselves to adapt. They come with a different type of swagger, a different type of character. So one of the simplest things I would do is actually have a conversation with a woman and listen to her. And they would 99 times out of 100 say, "Wow, I never knew men could sit and talk and listen." Well, I don't like to sit and talk and listen, but if that's the price of admission into your heart, then I understand from working things out that I'm going to have to earn you. I'm going to have to earn you. I'm not entitled to you. And so guys who are raised with an entitlement to women, they have a completely different approach. It's a completely
Yeah, and a lot of times it backfires.
Yeah.
I saw this. So when I was in grad school, there were all these guys who went back to their home country, and they went back over winter break and they got engaged, and then they went back over spring break and they got married, and they came back with these women who were just so far out of their league that you wouldn't even believe it. They looked like models walking next to these schlubby dudes. But then the problem is, if you take them out of that environment, they're here for a few years and they say, "What the fuck?" This.
Oh yeah.
My market value. I was taught that my value is down here. It's actually up here. There's a lot more that I want out of life, and then you get a backlash.
Well, it's disastrous. That's why I know a lot of guys keep their women in their home country. You know that, and they go visit them every couple of years. They keep them there, and I'm not saying good or bad. I'm just saying stay in your lane. I get how the system works. I didn't say it's a good or bad system because a lot of those arranged marriages last longer than love marriages, right? Because people learn to, lower their expectations. But once you understand that, as you stay in your lane, you observe the behavior, you can make transitions, you can adjust, and you're not as mad at people. I don't get mad at people for being racist. I used to when I was younger. I wanted the world to be fair. I wanted the world to play by rules. But I had drank the Kool-Aid of a lot of, a social manipulators of different kinds who wanted this utopian world. And when I got to meet people, you really realize, oh, I see how you came to your view. Based on the microscope or pinhole of your world that you're looking through the world, this is your truth and your reality. And that's why anything outside of that is you develop a dissonance and you can't see it. You can't see anything outside of your microtized worldview. That doesn't make you a rotten person. It makes you a fellow human being. Do I have to watch you? Do I have to be armed around you? Possibly. I wouldn't trust you with certain things because of your views, but there are certain things we can hang out with, we can meet on. And that's all I want to do. I want to get through my life with the least amount. I would love for there to be a world where all of us could have these conversations, whether we agreed with COVID or not. Does that difference of opinion break our relationship? Can we discuss, can I sit and talk to you and you said, you know what? I really am for genocide when it's not my people. I can roll with that. I can roll with that. And there are other people who are global or universal crusaders who say everything should work out right. I get where you're coming from, but you've never watched National Geographic's, the way animals survive. You're going to be running out there saving animals from predators. So you got to you stay in your lane. And when it comes to the shared experiences we have with people, you start to see that we tend to have more we can get along with than we don't get along, unless you have a religious reason for despising somebody, or you're on hyper alert, like we talked about earlier with the Egyptian lady at the college. Her whole life, she's wanted to be embraced by the ruling class, or what she perceived to be the super race. So she tap danced, kowtowed, smiled at every joke, every insult, did everything with the hope that it would make her life better, and it didn't work out. It's a cautionary tale for all of these people. Whenever people who hate you compliment you, you should be on alert. When they pat you on the head and say, I wish the others like you were like you. When the enemies of you, those that are indifferent to you, tell you you're great, you should wonder about it.
Yeah, that's right. Don't be anyone's bitch. Don't look for validation. Stay in your lane.
Any other thoughts on that, Radheya?
No, man, that's it.
Hey, tell us how your shows are going and how's your productions going? How's your music? How's your art?
Yeah, it's great. It's great. We're almost done with an album. So we got 15 songs coming out, which touch on everything from crypto to foreign policy to politics to mental health. It's really cool. I mean, I'm very excited about this project.
That sounds exciting. Tell me, what is your view on crypto?
I mean, I think it's a scam, but it's interesting also because it's like a lot of what we see in this world. It's a world of ideas, and if enough people believe, then it becomes real. And there are a lot of people who believe.
So, just in a short statement, why is it a scam?
Because I don't know what it is. I mean, it's just, there's no value behind it. You got money which is backed by a government. This isn't backed by a government. The government could get rid of it at any time. There's a collective belief that it's worth something, but it doesn't do anything. You can't use it to transact. It doesn't produce anything. It doesn't give you any income. It's just there. People have agreed that it's worth something. It takes a huge amount of energy to produce. It's a net negative for the planet. It enables.
That's a few good points. I was thinking about when you talk about money, they just print money. So it has very little value, but there's a social agreement that it has value. And that's why they're so few.
Yeah, it's a social agreement, and then you can use it to pay your taxes. That's where the value comes from.
There's so much fear of all these so-called developing nations having a currency backed by commodities. And so that's a big fear for the West. But another thing I think that when I think about this crypto thing is it was really pushed to be decentralized commerce, where you could just go buy or sell anything you want and there was no third party involved, right? And I was always suspicious, even with the people who were founders of that. They were telling me how great it was. And I kept asking them, I said, but can the government intervene? Oh, no, you have this, you have that. And as soon as the Ukraine-Russia thing started, the government confiscated their crypto wallets. So it's not decentralized. That, to me, should have told everybody this shit doesn't work. I think that was one thing.
Yeah, it's a good point. Yeah, Z, let's get into this next time. Maybe we could do a separate topic on set.
I just wanted to drag you out a little bit and see what else is going on. That's all.
Yeah. All right.
All right. I'll talk to you soon.
All right, brother. Appreciate you.
If you enjoyed the show, please consider leaving us a review on Podbean, iTunes, or your favorite podcasting app. Each 5-star review helps us bring you more unique and insightful content. Learn more at dharmamedia.com. Peace.